It's so important that we understand this as founders, because I'm going to push on this time and again. You do not teach music lessons. You never have, you never will. You transform lives, period. And you use your music lessons as a vehicle for that. Your retention will go through the roof if the parents of your kids know that you're invested in their growth as a human.
So Nate, for a while now, we have been sending out these podcast episodes, and one of the things that we ask is send in your questions. And I have been collecting, and you have been collecting a lot of questions around the topic that we're going to cover today, which is retention. And we finally built up so many that I think it was just time for us to do this one. So I am really interested today in jumping in and looking at student retention, strategies for keeping it, which is a topic that a lot of people have spilled a lot of ink on, and examining, I think, some deeper things that I believe about this topic that came out for me in a recent conversation with a client of mine. So I'm ready to just jump into it. And I have a question I'd like to lead off for you.
Fire.
How much time does Brooklyn Music Factory spend on talking about this topic?
Wow. You mean annually, weekly, monthly?
I'm going to leave it open because I know that you all have this rhythm of, team meetings and things of that nature. And so I'm sure it comes up at all those levels. And hey, I mean, maybe a good way to start this out is to look at it from those three levels. I don't know, but I kind of did leave it a little bit open-ended there so that to give you room to answer it in the way that kind of first came to mind.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a 30,000 foot guy, as you know. I always like to think, where are we going to be a year from now? Where are we going to be 3 years from now? So as a result, whenever I think about retention, Daniel, I start with a 12-month arc. And so we have sort of seasons. I think of like, as a school owner, where is my attention being paid seasonally? So we're entering into our re-enrollment season. It's the spring, and we are thinking about the fall right now. So for example, we will spend a large amount of time in the months of April, May, and June focused on retention. In fact, other than ensuring that our summer camp is a thriving, program, and ensuring that it's sold out and all of the families that are signed up are well served in anticipation of the summer, other than that, the number one topic of conversation is retention in Q2 of every year. So how much time exactly, Daniel? I can't tell you, but I think in terms of percentage of attention that we as an organization pay to any one topic, and it gets a large percentage in Q2.
And not so much in other quarters.
It does. We look at, in our Slack channel, we have a cancellation channel, and we monitor that cancellation channel daily. So we know exactly when someone cancels. That's just a little automated system we have where we get a zap in Slack when Jessica cancels a student, someone gets canceled. We also monitor every month the retention of every one of our teachers. So we know what percentage of their students they're retaining. The last metric that we monitor, I know we're going to talk in much more deeply about why we measure certain things. But the last thing that I measure from a founder standpoint is what has our historical average of retention been over the course of a school year. And I actually do it in the flip. I say, what percentage of our total student body is canceled in the last 30 days? That's how I measure retention. So I look at the flip. Sounds a little negative, but honestly, it's an easier number for me because it's a small one. So I look at that and I say, historically, Brooklyn Music Factory has always lost about X percentage of our total student body over a given 30 days. And I want to make sure that we're always very close to that or beating it. So that's the attention I pay to it on a month-to-month basis.
Interesting. Okay. So this is a topic that, as I looked beyond the borders of my own business and the businesses that I was involved in. Really, when I started doing the coaching and consulting thing 5+ years ago, this was a topic that came to mind in a way that it never had before. I'm going to tell you why. I think this is a good way to kind of begin this. That I started as I was doing research on, hey, what's out there in terms of resources for school owners around business? And, to be honest, 5 years ago, it was a very different landscape than it is now. It seems like every other week I'm finding another Facebook group of a would-be coach or would-be, marketing consultant to music schools. When I did my initial research, and even true up until this day, I saw for a lot of these coaches and consultants that I'm going to say paid lip service. That kind of sounds negative. I'm not saying they just paid lip service to it, but I noticed that it was a big talking point. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Retention. Here's how you increase your student retention. There is not a single thing, not a single business or would-be helper that wasn't mentioning that. And what was interesting to me was that they wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't a topic, if it wasn't top of mind. Good marketing means, hey, talk to people about what they're thinking about. And so, I look at this person. Oh, they're talking about retention. Look at this person. Oh, they have their 52 tips for how to increase your student retention. I just kept finding things like this all around. And that was surprising to me. And I'm going to tell you why, because for my own studio, it was never a topic that came up. Now, admittedly, my studio was different than, a bigger school. But at the same time, we were running a summer camp. And then I was doing marketing and business strategy with my best friend who does own a school that has hundreds of students in it. So I've kind of got the viewpoint from several different business types because of what I was involved in, what I was a partner in, what I was a co-owner in, and those sorts of things. And it never came up, not in my own studio, not in the summer camp, and not in my, very close friend studio that I was advising and kind of had a free hand in how they were doing marketing and things of that nature. And so here's what I'm getting at. Because it wasn't an issue in any one of these businesses, I didn't have this mentality of, oh, how do I increase their retention? How do I increase retention? How do we increase retention? And so my thinking on this developed a lot differently. And I took a decidedly different stance on this than hey, what are the tactics? What are the tips to increase retention? There is a much more holistic viewpoint that I want to give on this. And I think it's going to come out as you and I talk, because I think you're talking about the 30,000 foot view and you're measuring the metrics and all that sort of thing. And I am a metrics guy. It's true. But this is one area where I really didn't do the metrics around it. And as I was prepping for this episode, as I've been thinking about this for several months, because I knew this topic was coming up, I was thinking, why did that never come up for me? Why did I not measure this in the way that I measured my funnels? Why did I not measure this in the way that I measured other things? And so there's some contrarian advice. There's a contrarian viewpoint that I have on this topic that I think is very different than some of the other. Then I think the predominant way of talking about retention. And frankly, this is the first time I've kind of talked about it. And I feel myself, even as I'm communicating this, realizing like, wow, this is the first time it's coming out. And this isn't as polished. I'm hearing myself sound not as polished as I typically am on marketing topics or business strategy topics or systems or organization and that sort of thing. And so there's a little bit of trepidation I have coming into this episode because I realize I haven't talked about all that much, but there is a little bit of excitement too, because since this isn't something I've talked about before, this is kind of the first time I'm ever going to publicly really go in depth on this. So that's kind of the start. That's what I'll put there into this into the conversational hopper that we've got to deal with as we kind of go through this. So I like your viewpoint that you were kind of saying. I think I have a different viewpoint, not a contrarian viewpoint, not oppositional to your viewpoint, but I think we're going to come at this from different ways. So I'm just going to put that out there. I'm curious where you think we should go next.
I think we should read a listener comment question right out of the gate, because I'm super excited, dude, to hear your kind of alternate view on retention. I find it fascinating that with your different friends and school, your own school, actually don't find it surprising with your own school that retention wasn't an issue, but I find it fascinating with some of your friends who you're working with that was never a topic. But let me just read this because I love this. This came from a school owner who wrote in and just said, retention, period. That's the only thing that matters at this point, period. We do a pretty dang good job at getting people through the door. We do an equally good job at seeing them through the exit in less than a year. And that to me is the pain point. So the first thing I want to just present in terms of strategy at Brooklyn Music Factory is usually the strategy is all about serving the parents, getting to know the parents, staying in constant contact with the parents because they hold the purse strings, right? They're the ones who are going to cancel or retain or not cancel their kids, right? And of course, there's wisdom to that, right? The kid is either coming home really excited from their piano lesson and looking forward to the next one, or they're coming home sort of, come see, come saw, or they're coming home with a negative experience, right? So obviously we want the first. We want all of our students to leave the lesson at Brooklyn Music Factory feeling like they had more fun than they could have even imagined having. And so they're just anxious to come back to the next week because, as we talk all the time, it's like we have this image of a 7 to 10 year journey. This is our roadmap for any one of our students. And so the only chance of us really transforming their life and giving them this opportunity to see themselves as a lifelong music maker is if they're excited week after week, right? So there's a lot of wisdom in talking about the student and their experience. However, we actually take the strategy of starting with our teachers. Basically, we are in constant conversation with our teachers around their relationships with their students and their communication with the students' parents. That's why in previous episodes, we've talked about how consistent communication is one of our core values. Because essentially, for example, one of the real things we're doing in our all staff in a week from now is we are spending an hour and a half talking about writing musicians' journey reports. There's sort of like a annual report card. And that musician's journey report is all about the teacher investing their energy into every one of their students and imagining where their student can be in 6 months and 12 months, and then sharing that vision with the parent. And guess what? That's step one in our re-enrollment campaign. Right? So our strategy actually starts with the teacher and ensuring that the teacher has all the tools that she needs in order to serve that student and communicate well with the parent. And then from there, we get down into the nitty-gritty of student by student by student by student, right? We actually don't spend a whole lot of time parent by parent by parent by parent. We go teacher to student, right? And then we assume that if we do it well, the parent will be like, man, they're really invested in my child's journey. Obviously, I'm going to stay. So that's our overview of our strategy. I can talk about specific steps, but I wanted to just sort of lay that out to begin, Daniel. Any thoughts that come up just when you hear it? That's the overall strategy we have.
That vision piece, it does sound a lot like you. And, as I hear that, I think the thing that comes to mind is that the parent receives that report. The report itself is not the thing that keeps them in. Would you agree with that statement?
I would say it's not the email report that matters. It's the content within it.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, totally.
Because this is just what I can't escape. And I thought this would come up deeper in the episode, but it's on my mind right now.
Fire. What do you got?
It's that all the advice around this that I tend to find is tactical based. So in other words, the person who's giving the retention advice, go do this thing, retention gets better. I think the classic example that the first time I read it, I literally sat in my chair laughing, was giving attendance bracelets.
Yes. Right. It's all like, yeah.
So in other words, what I really want to draw out is that it's not because BMF does these reports, it's the thing behind the report that's driving the success. If someone decides, oh, I'm going to do vision reports too. Okay. They try it. Doesn't work. Oh, well, I'll have to go talk to Nate. It must be what they're putting in the report that does that. Or maybe I'm writing it wrong. But there's this tactical mindset. In fact, a lot of the questions that we received on this topic, I feel they betray a shallow view of what drives retention. As if I do this thing, it equals the student stays longer. But what I don't want to be heard right now is that I'm not saying here that, oh, your report-based thing, it's not good. I think there's something that you're doing beneath the report that is in total agreement with kind of my thinking on this matter too. And I'm trying to draw out from you, Nate, like what is it that you feel that is the deeper principle that people can get behind the report? Because maybe they don't do a report. Maybe they do like, a one-on-one conversation with the parent because they have the time to do that. Or maybe it doesn't take the form of the vision report. Maybe it looks very different, but what's the deeper principle that you feel drives the success around this thing that you're doing that's working so well for you? That's what I want to get at.
Yeah. So the tactics are important because you need to do X number of actions in any given year to have any chance of success. However, the underlying principle, the number one thing that correlates in our observation to retention is the relationship, right? The relationship specifically between the teacher and the student. So I want to frame this correctly. And then I've just pulled up a template for a musician's journey report because I want to share the categories. But you're talking foundationally, what does every school owner need to have in order to have a chance at improving their retention? So there's two parts in my mind. In my observation, it's this. We've talked at length about this, and we'll talk more and more about this, but every single person listening has a very unique why and purpose behind their program. And the curriculum needs to support that. And we'll talk more about that. So for example, at Brooklyn Music Factory, we are a songwriting program that's an ear before eye approach, and it's game-based in the classroom, and we celebrate our students through songwriting parties multiple times a year. That's it, right? There's like a 2-sentence explanation. Then, so you give that clear definition of your approach, your purpose, your why, and then you say we have curriculum to support it. And then the teachers develop deep relationships with every one of their students so that they can guide them strategically through this curriculum. Now, everybody listening has teachers that are really good at developing relationships with their students, and teachers that need a little bit more coaching on that, right? But there is no question in my mind over the last dozen years that we've been doing it at the factory and over the 32 years that I've been teaching, that knowing every one of my students and knowing their needs week to week to move them successfully to the next songwriting party is paramount to retaining them year to year. And I'm going to state the obvious here, Daniel. What is my retention at Brooklyn Music Factory? Of course it's 100%. But I'm the founder. Like, I literally am the person who is like, along with my business partner, said, these are our core values. This is a lot of the games we play, I designed in this studio a dozen years ago, so I'm not exactly the right person to be representing the retention number. However, I'm absolutely the right person to coach my teachers and to work closely with my directors around how to develop strong relationships with our students and how to implement the curriculum correctly based on where a student is in their musician's journey. So Anywho, that's
Well, let me ask you let me
But-
ask you a question on that. Let me ask you a question on that. I've heard you talk about that concept before, that we, as owners, we can't compare our team members to us.
Mhm.
Could you tell me why, in your experience, why do you feel that retention is lower? If it is relationship based, why is retention lower with a team teacher, with one of your teaching staff, than it would be with you? Like, I realize that you embody the values, that sort of thing, but if in your estimation, retention is based on that deeper principle or deeper foundational aspect of relationship, those students have a relationship with their teacher. What would make the teacher then have a lower retention number than you, let's say?
Okay, so I'm just jotting down some ideas here, but there's a few different things that come to mind. Number one, we as founders always want to be very realistic. And so my student count is, I mean, I don't have it right in front of me, but let's say it's 10.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very manageable number of students that I'm maintaining weekly relationships with. However, another teacher rather on our team who might be teaching 5 classes plus a private lesson studio may be managing 55 relationships. Obviously, it's more difficult to manage 55 unique relationships versus 10. So to be fair, I don't expect that teacher to have 100% retention on 55 relationships. I can't remember what the data point is, but like that idea of like how many you can actually have in your network, how many relationships you can actually maintain. It's like, it totally breaks down when you reach over 100. You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. There's sociological data that when a network or an organization crosses the 150 person barrier, that it gets much more. It becomes very hard for it to retain the unique properties that it had when it's below.
Yeah. So if I imagine, so that's number one. I imagine a teacher. They have all their own personal relationships they're maintaining. Then on the job site at the factory, they're maintaining, say, 50 or 60 relationships. That's quite a bit. That's a heavy load. Number one. Number two, I've been doing it for 32 years. A lot of our teachers coming in have been doing it for 3 years. So we're very aware that we break of our age groups. Our age 4 to 6. 4 to 8. Even 4 and 5s are different than 6 to 8. And then we go 9 to 12, and then we do 13 and up. Maintaining relationships with a 4 and 5-year-old is radically different than maintaining a relationship, right, with a 13 and up. So each one of those age ranges requires a level of training.
Okay.
In order to be able to learn how to develop those relationships and communicate with a 5-year-old, et cetera, versus a 13-year-old. And then the last thing I'll say is that, in all fairness, a lot of the students that I'm working with, you've talked about this in your own studio before, I remember. And then you were talking about a friend of yours who's doing this. But in my own studio, a lot of the students that I'm working with have been in the program already for, say, 5-6 years. They're deeply invested. They're not going anywhere unless there's a life change. And even if there's a life change, I'm just taking them online. If I'm not teaching them in person, right? If they move to Canada or whatever, I'll just continue with them. So, whereas if we enroll in, like, for example, we'll enroll maybe 75 new private lesson students in the fall who are just beginning their journey at the factory. And let's say 15 of them go with a new teacher. They're just beginning their journey. So there's a normal amount of attrition that happens within a new class, so that's sort of the last piece that comes. But I think there's absolutely a training by age, learning how to develop relationships and communicate with those age ranges. And I also think that there is you have to be cognizant of the number of students that any one of your teachers has, and understand that developing developing and maintaining relationships with those, that's tricky if it gets up. It gets up to like 30, 40, 50 students.
Okay.
Mm,
I,
yeah.
I've heard the adage that kids don't quit lessons, their parents do.
Hmm.
And I can't remember where I heard that. Um, I found that to be very true. That if the parent had a stick to it attitude, I remember one of uh, one of my more memorable relationships in my own studio was with a family that I still have years later, a decade and a half later, still have a great relationship with. And the father in that family said to all the kids, "You're taking piano for 5 years,
Hmm.
or unless you die." Saying this to his eight-year old son, you know.
Dig it.
Um, but what's interesting is that families, when the 5 years was up, two of the three kids quit, and then the other one, she finished high school, so she played from I think the time she was 6 to 18. The other kids did their 5 years, and I think actually the middle child, their second daughter, I think she actually went beyond 5 years, and then she stopped at a certain point. Um, and I think that's just a testament to the fact that there was investment there. But as she got into high school, she got busy, and that's really the make or breaker time. Here's my point: is that once again, you were talking just a second ago, and I'm asking some challenging questions here. I appreciate you allowing me to grill you like this, but
Keep them coming.
I find, first off, I find that statement to be true. Parents quit lessons far more than their kids quit lessons. How important is it then in terms of this retention conversation and that relational angle? I'm throwing all this into the soup here and seeing what comes out. We have the relationships. We have the parents being the ones that are really the primary decision maker on where their dollars are spent and how long they stay in a studio and how committed they're going to be. How important is the teacher's relationship with the parent? Is it different at BMF than it? Do you take it a different way? Because I know you have a director of family communications. Do you put that primary burden on your family communications director or on the teacher? How does that work? Can you give me some insight into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wrote down some ideas here. So we have a community room at Brooklyn Music Factory. It's
Mm-hmm.
been challenged over the last couple of years, but we do our damnedest to try to maintain a version of that. And that community room, one of the things we train our teachers to is how to communicate in 5 minutes or less at the end of each lesson with the parent. We literally, like, what is one of my key roles at BMF? It's modeling how to communicate with parents in the community room. I won't even be teaching. I'll spend a couple hours there hanging out with parents, talking about this or that, or writing a speed song with the student, et cetera. And so not only do you have to develop a relationship, your teachers have to develop a relationship with the student. And that relationship with the student is around helping guide them through the journey that your school promises. And keep in mind, this is when you say what's hidden underneath it all. Keep in mind the journey is not completing piano lessons, right? It's not getting through all 12 levels of our songwriting party. It's transforming this human through the process of celebrating them through 12 songwriting parties. So you have to get very clear on how you're transforming this kid. It's so important that we understand this as founders, because I'm going to push on this time and again. You do not teach music lessons. You never have, you never will. You transform lives, period. And you use your music lessons as a vehicle for that. Your retention will go through the roof if the parents of your kids know that you're invested in their growth as a human. I promise you that being able to do a circus act and play great piano is not enough, right? It doesn't matter if your students develop amazing piano technique and can play the heck out of some Rachmaninoff. The parent who has no idea even how a student or a human gets to that, unless they're one of those few professional musician parents that we rarely have, but we have them, right? The parent doesn't understand what's actually happening with their child as they're learning all of that. But what they do understand is that their child is growing as a human and transforming in a way that you can describe, right? So it's just vital, vital, vital that we start with our teachers and we hammer home the idea of what your purpose is at your studio. Then we hammer home the idea that these music lessons or classes that you provide your that these teachers are teaching are about transforming the lives of those students. And then you hammer home the idea that the only way we ever have a chance of transformation is through developing deep relationships with our students. It's just sort of like, I mean, this might be like, everybody might be like, that sounds amazing, dude. But actually, I mean, I just had 5 people quit and I'm totally demoralized. I get it. However, you need to sort of always go back up to 10,000 feet and be like, wait a minute, what is my purpose? Why does it work with me as a teacher? And how can I communicate that to my other teachers? What's so successful with me and my relationships with my students? And then make an effort to communicate that consistently with your other teachers and with your staff. I'm going to stop there, but I love your question, Daniel. So let's come back to it around the role that our director of family communications plays, because she actually plays a very different role than the one I was just describing. So maybe we circle back to it, but I'm going to pause there because that was kind of a big bite to chew on.
I don't necessarily have a question around that or a little add-on thought. I think it kind of speaks for itself. Maybe the best place to go is to figure out where the family communications director plays in this
the ecosystem, right?
This ecosystem is a perfect the ecosystem of how this all works out in your school, because I'm just biting my tongue. I've got a lot to say, but I want to get to the depths of what BMF does. And then I think there are some thoughts I want to inject into here that are not contradictory or oppositional to what you're saying. I think they'll also complement it very, very well. So let's talk about the family communications director.
So let's in order to do that, let's go back to our musicians journey reports. So we have writing parties. It's 3 days long. We pay all our teachers to show up to them, whether it's virtual or in person. And part of those musicians journey writing parties, part of our motivation is we just want to make sure all the teachers get them done, right? Because everybody's busy. If you just leave everyone onto their own devices, it doesn't work quite as well, we found. So it's better to have this big writing party. However, one of the other motivations for me is that I always deliver 1 or 2 little master classes as a founder on how to write a great musician's journey report. And then I always pepper it with our why and our purpose and sort of frame it for the teachers so that they can really compose from the why, instead of being just factual, like your student now can play the following major scales. Your student will ultimately be able to play 3 more major scales. Like, no parent knows what to do with that information. They need to understand that a major scale is going to help develop deeper melodic writing, which will then improve. You'll see that appear in a new key when they move from D major to E flat major in the songwriting party next winter, and so they're expanding their knowledge and flexing their musical brain, things like that. So we have a songwriting party. We have a songwriter's journey, musician's journey report party. Now, the bringing in our family communications, our director there, every single one of those reports, she is CC'd on. So now all of a sudden she has, whatever it is, 300 emails in her box. And what's amazing for her is that's the link to re-enrollment. So the teacher is talking about re-enrolling their students for the fall to be able to realize this vision. And all a family has to do is pay a $95 deposit and they get on the schedule for the fall. That's it. Low commitment, really easy. We're just trying to, as everybody knows, if someone will commit with the credit card, that changes the game they're in, right? It doesn't matter the dollar amount, right?
Mm.
So next, Jessica's now linked through those musician's journey reports. And so then that's the baton handoff. Then she runs with it. And yes, she's got a mountain of work. For her busy season is May through the end of June, and it falls like a cliff in July 1st. So
it sounds a little bit like an accountant with tax season.
It's exactly like that, dude. And so she knows, like, she's ramping up right now for her busiest time of the year, which is re-enrollment. And then it's dead. And, in July, we go on vacation, we do different things, but it's super quiet for her in July. Meanwhile, our summer camp is bumping. So that's the link to the director of family. And so there's two things that are so important there. Number one, we learned that the teacher can't be the sole person responsible for re-enrolling their flock of students. They immediately think of themselves as a sales and marketing person, and they hate that. It's like having to put on a hat where they just want to develop the student and their music and their journey as a musician. They don't want to have to try to sell them on something, right? So we learned over time, like, it doesn't really work for them. So number one, it passes off to Jessica, who's totally comfortable, and that's her role. She enrolls all the students and schedules them. So, and number two, it gives Jessica a totally different view on this student that she doesn't otherwise have, right? Jessica's not a music teacher. She's not in the classroom. She hasn't watched that student except for she sees them on the songwriting parties. So now all of a sudden she has this detailed report that she can reference if the parent has questions. So those are the two purposes, and that's how she gets linked in. Dude, I want to ping over to you, pivot a little bit, because I'm really curious to get your perspective on it.
Okay.
You feel like it's time?
Well, I actually had some questions about everything you've said up to this point, because I feel like I've been putting together a map of the territory of how you think about it. And we've done, I think, a really good job, if I may say so myself, of really just letting you kind of put all the thoughts out there on the table. Mm-hmm. So could I say back to you what I feel like I've heard you say for the last half hour or so?
Yeah. Fire. What do we do?
Okay. So so I think we have the wrong R word. You don't think about retention, you think about relationships. And so what I feel like I hear you saying is this. One, you want to train your frontline teachers how to build relationships well with the students themselves. Not only that, you have both the teachers and your family communications director in communication with the parent and giving them a vision for what their child's skill and music journey is going to look like. And then on top of that, you actually have a series of milestones built into your curriculum and into the fabric of the school itself that gives children these kind of, and parents both, measurable points of progress, that it's not just an ongoing, oh, we're doing lessons. But they're more substantial than just, oh, we passed another book. I also feel like there's a fourth thing I felt like I heard you say, that actually a fourth and fifth, that the actual vision that you have for the school really plays a huge part in this, in a way different than the vision for the child itself, that it kind of seeps into everything, and that there's a real richness to the story of the school, which plays into this. That's kind of an intangible. You can't really measure that. But then that vision plays into choices that are being made throughout the year, and even in how the school is set up. I think a good example of that is your community room. That's precious. We talked about this in some of the first episodes we did, that's precious real estate in one of the most expensive cities in the world to rent commercial space, where you just have a space where people can commune, where teachers and parents and kids and non-student kids can kind of hang out, and there's a feel to everything, and that relationships are being built naturally. And a sixth point I might add is that all of this got created from a vision from what you thought was possible. You probably changed things along the way, but it wasn't created from a point of, hey, let me look at this 9 tips for increasing my student retention PDF And let me try to build something. Like, it came from kind of a deep belief and vision for what you felt the school should be, student results should be, that sort of thing. Okay, so here's my question for you. How closely did I nail it? What I get wrong? What I get right? I'm curious what your thoughts are as you hear that said back to you.
There's a couple things that you said that I want to highlight because they're really, really great. They're important reframing. I think first of all, dude, I think your R word comment is perfect. We have the wrong word. It's not retention, it's relationships. How are we doing with our relationships? The second thing I'll say is, yes, yes, and yes. When we look at our programs that we're building, everybody listening here is building something, and they're building something that is coming from here. It is absolutely coming from their heart. And I say this often, and it's because I truly, truly believe it. Like, if you were in it for the money, you'd be doing something else. If you were in it for ego, you wouldn't sustain. If you were in it for all these other reasons, other than a calling you have, for a lack of a better term, you wouldn't last. You would definitely not be listening to a podcast on how to do it better. You wouldn't be spending your time researching and being this curious. And so like, I'm looking at our musician's journey reports, for example, and you say this so well, Daniel, when you're like, Nate, you didn't just read a list of 7 things you're supposed to do and then check that list and follow it. You developed a system based on, I mean, believe me, I read books, I've read plenty on retention, but you developed a system that was going to work within the community you were building. If I look at our musician's journey reports, which is a template, it's just a Google Doc template, like, it's not fancy, but the opening sentence is, here at Brooklyn Music Factory, it's important for us to see every student on their own journey to musical fluency. And we distinguish the next best steps on their path into the 4 categories above. And the categories are technique, which we call skills and drills, but technique, passion, that's this, like, how passionate, how excited is your child and what's really exciting them. Music theory, which to us is both the ear and the brain. So that's all of our big music games, tons of gaming around ear training and music theory. And then finally, community. We literally measure whether or not we're developing their community. So we talk about how many other students they collaborated with. On a songwriting party, did they play with 4 other students or only 1 other student? Because if they only played with 1 other student, that's a little bit of a failure on our part. So we're striving to get them to collaborate with 3 other students next time, right? So anyways, those are our categories in the musician's journey report. And it's not to say that people listening should just all of a sudden adopt those categories. It's to say that you should take a moment and you should ask yourself the following. This is a great thought exercise that came up when I was listening to you recap, Daniel, which is, take one single relationship that you've developed over a long period of time and ask yourself why it's working. So pick a single student that you've been working with for, I don't care how long, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and just say, what has worked in your relationship with that student? How has that person been transformed over the 7 years that you've worked with her, right? And yes, you can ask, well, what has the curriculum that you've applied? But also ask yourself, what are the questions that she's brought up? What are some of the pivot points? What are some of the inflection points you've had in your relationship with her over 7 years? And then ask yourself, how have you communicated all of those inflection points, those challenges, those successes with the parents? Like, it just was reminded, dude, I brought up one of my students' musician's journey report from 2020. So this is one of the beautiful things about this. As you write these reports year after year after year, you can look back and be like, we have open conversations with our students about what we envisioned for them 3 years ago versus what they're doing now. We'll literally pull up a musician's journey report from years ago And I'll talk about it with my 12-year-old student. And I'll be like, when you were 9, this is what we imagined. What can we do now versus what have we achieved? What are we still working on? But like this student's I'm bringing up, Nio, dude, talk about developing relationships. He's a huge basketball fan, massive. His mom's from Milwaukee, and of course the Bucks just won it all. And so like 4 weeks ago, mom texted me and was like, Nate, let's go watch the Nets play the Bucks. So that's what we're telling you. Say replace retention with relationships. Obviously, not all your teachers are taking people to basketball games. That's not happening. However, it's the little things that develop the relationships. It's sending videos, it's sending photos, it's texting in between lessons to be like, just checking in on Nio to see how he's doing with his songwriting, with the new chords in A major. It's those little things where people begin to develop trust that you're actually looking out for the well-being of their child, right? This goes beyond whether or not they can play piano, right? And in truth, Daniel, I mean, you talk about this all the time. You do such a good job with those that you coach, which is like, this is about transformation. And so we just need to reframe it. We need to say music lessons are about transformation, period. And relationships develop as we help one another in that journey, period. Like that's how we view it at BMF. So to keep it real, dude, I hammer this theme. I will hammer this theme at the all staff meeting next Friday. I will say it over and over. I will literally say to the teaching staff, you do not teach music lessons. You change kids' lives. I'll say it like 6 times, and I've said it already like 600 times in the last 3 months. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. But I think you did a great job on recapping. And if we have time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Slack channel we have that's just called Musician's Journey. And people post responses from parents that they get after they send out their reports. And it's just a way for teachers to celebrate one another. Okay, Daniel, so that's a whole lot about BMF. You did a great job recapping it. I think you hit it on the head when you said it's all about relationships rather than retention. Hopefully we learned a lot just about how BMF tries to develop relationships. But I think it's time to go to you now, because I want to get your perspective on this. Can we pivot and get Daniel's perspective on retention?
I think we can, but here's what I'll suggest. Let's leave people on a cliffhanger and let's pick this back up in our next episode, because we've already kind of gone in depth on this one, and we're stretching the bounds of time, I think, and the patience that people might have. And honestly, I just want to give people time to reflect on this, because honestly, I think that where I'm going to take this, as I've been saying throughout the episode, it's not contrarian, it's not oppositional, it's the 1-2 punch. And I think what I'm going to talk about is the natural follow-on to what you've been talking about. So let's pick up the next episode, Nate.
Okay, solid. See you then.